A new shelter manager named Brandon Hale told the elderly black man in the worn denim shirt that he was not the kind of visitor the Delta Paws Rescue Center was looking for that morning. It was 10:47 on a Tuesday in April, and the shelter sat at the end of Mockingbird Lane in Clarksdale, Mississippi, where the cotton fields had only just started to push green through the red clay. 3 other people heard him say it. None of them spoke up. Brandon was 34 years old, 6 feet tall, with the kind of haircut a man gets when he wants people to take him seriously without having to earn it. He wore a gray quarter-zip pullover with the shelter logo stitched above the heart in navy thread, khaki pants pressed to a sharp line, brown leather shoes that had never once walked behind a kennel. The clipboard he carried held a printed quarterly report titled A Daughter Quality Index Q1 Review. He had been hired 6 months earlier by a 4-member board that wanted, in the chairman's words, a more disciplined operating model. Brandon had taken that sentence and built a religion out of it. The man in the denim shirt did not argue. He sat on the bench against the back wall of the front lobby, hands resting easy on his knees, a faint smile at the corner of his mouth that did not reach the rest of his face. A small gold hoop earring caught the light when he turned his head. His hair was white, cut short, and his beard was trimmed the way men trim beards when they have been doing it themselves for 40 years. He wore a faded chambray work shirt, dark jeans, brown leather boots that had been resoled at least twice, and a soft Panama hat sat on the bench beside him. He looked, to anyone glancing in from the parking lot, like a man waiting on his ride. He was not waiting on his ride. The next 22 minutes would unmake a career inside that building, and the people in the lobby would never agree on which exact moment did it. This man was Morgan Freeman. The Delta Paws Rescue Center had stood at the corner of Mockingbird Lane and Old Highway 61 for 15 years and 1 month. The land it sat on had been donated by a man whose name did not appear anywhere on the building. The original construction grant, $1,247,000, paid in 3 installments between February and November of 2010, had come from a Mississippi-registered trust whose tax filings listed only a numbered fund and a Tupelo accountant who refused to confirm or deny anything to anyone. May Whitaker, age 72, had been the first person hired. She was still there. She was the only person left who had been there at the beginning. May was standing behind the front counter sorting intake forms when Morgan walked in that morning. She did not look up at first because she was counting. She kept count of strays the way some people keep count of grandchildren. When she did look up, she did not say his name. She let her hand pause in the middle of stapling 2 pages together, and she let her face go very still for 1 breath, and then she looked back down at the paperwork and let the stapler hit the desk softly. Twice that was the signal. She had been waiting 15 years for a reason to use it. No one in the building knew what the 2 soft staples meant except her, and now, somewhere in the back office, the security camera footage was being time-stamped at 10:43 a.m. The shelter that morning held 41 animals, 38 of them dogs, 2 cats, and 1 rabbit with a missing ear. The newest arrival had come in 6 days earlier, found near a closed bait shop outside Tutwiler. He was a 5-week-old German Shepherd puppy with paws too big for the rest of him, fur the color of wet straw and burnt umber, and a habit of staring at people the way a small magistrate stares at a courtroom. The intake form had listed him as Animal List 2024-0411. May had crossed that out and written Milo in pencil, then a question mark, then nothing. Brandon had visited the kennel that held Milo exactly twice in 6 days. On both visits he had written in his quarterly review 2 words in the margin, hard place. In Brandon's vocabulary, hard place was shorthand for an animal that had not yet been adopted in a window the algorithm considered acceptable. He had told the staff gently the first time and less gently the second that the shelter could not afford to keep building emotional investment in animals that did not move. The phrase he had used twice was unit economics. May had not responded either time. She had only stapled 2 intake forms softly, twice. Caleb Rohr came through the front door of Delta Paws at 10:51, 4 minutes after Morgan had been told to leave. He did not know any of this had happened yet. He was holding the door open for his younger sister Lily, who walked in first with a paper coffee cup in one hand and a folded printout from a website in the other. Caleb was 34 years old, the same age as Brandon Hale, but the resemblance ended there. He stood 5'11", sturdy through the shoulders with the kind of plain face that did not invite conversation. He wore a gray work hoodie, jeans gone soft at the knees, and a pair of brown boots whose left toe had been scuffed gray from kicking the brake of a forklift at the Riceland Rice Mill in Cleveland, Mississippi, where he had worked night security for the last 3 years. Caleb had served 2 tours in Iraq with the 155th Armored Brigade, Mississippi Army National Guard, from 2008 to 2013. He had come home to bury his father, taken the security job at the rice mill, and not spoken to a counselor once. His sister Lily, 28, worked as a part-time pharmacy tech in Greenville, and considered her older brother her unfinished project. She had driven down that morning specifically to get him out of his trailer. She had told him they were going to look at a dog. He had agreed because saying no to Lily, in his experience, always required more energy than saying yes. Brandon turned toward the new arrivals at the sound of the door. He looked at Caleb's hoodie first, then at his boots, then at the way Caleb kept one hand near his thigh as he stood inside the doorway. Brandon's clipboard tilted slightly. The smile he produced was the smile a man wears when he has already decided who is and is not worth his time. There were now 4 people sitting or standing in that lobby besides Brandon, May, Caleb, and Lily. One was a college-age volunteer named Hannah Pruitt, age 19, refilling the water cooler. One was a delivery driver from Greenwood, age 45, dropping off a case of bleach. One was Clara Hartwell, age 32, the senior shelter technician, holding a folded blanket she had just pulled out of the dryer. One was Morgan, still on the bench, still smiling faintly, still holding a Panama hat on his lap. None of them yet understood what they were about to witness. It would be remembered later as the morning the new manager refused 4 people in a row and only the 4th refusal mattered. Lily walked straight up to the counter with her printout and said, in her easy Midwestern warm voice, that they were here about the German Shepherd puppy, the one the website had flagged as urgent. Brandon stepped in front of May before May could answer. He set his clipboard down on the counter, lined the edge up with the edge of the desk, and asked Caleb, not Lily, whether he had brought proof of stable income for the last 6 months. Caleb said he had a pay stub on his phone. Brandon said he needed a printed copy. Caleb said he could pull it up right now. Brandon said, still smiling, that the new adopter quality policy, effective March of that year, required a printed copy of 6 months of pay stubs, a current utility bill in the applicant's name, and a personal reference from a non-family member. He recited the list the way a man recites a verse he memorized in school and has been waiting his whole adult life to use on someone. The smile did not move. The clipboard sat perfectly aligned. Lily said her brother had served 2 tours in Iraq. Brandon said the policy did not list military service as a qualifying factor. May set her stapler down again once, this time, softer than before. Caleb did not raise his voice. He had not raised his voice in 7 years. He simply looked at Brandon for a long moment, the way a man looks at a vending machine that has eaten his last dollar, and then he turned his head slightly to the right and looked at the bench against the back wall. The man in the denim shirt was already looking back at him. Morgan nodded once, just once. It was not the kind of nod a stranger gives a stranger. It was the kind of nod a man gives another man when he has already seen exactly what is happening and intends to do something about it, but not yet. Caleb did not nod back. He simply held the look for 2 seconds and then turned back to Brandon and said, in a voice so flat it almost sounded polite, that he could come back another day. Lily started to argue. Caleb put his hand on her elbow, the lightest touch, and shook his head once. They turned toward the door. They did not reach it. A small thump, sharp and uneven, came from the long hallway that led back to the kennels, then another. Then the soft skittering of toenails on tile. Then a 5-week-old German Shepherd puppy named Milo came around the corner at a wobble that approximated a sprint, oversized paws sliding sideways on every 3rd step, ears flopping in directions that suggested neither of them had been consulted, and made directly for Caleb Rohr's left boot. The puppy did not stop. He did not slow down. He hit Caleb's boot at full toddler speed, planted both front paws on the worn leather, and began climbing. He made it as far as Caleb's knee before his back legs lost interest, at which point he dangled briefly, recovered, and seized the cuff of Caleb's jeans in his teeth. He braced, he pulled. The jeans did not move. The puppy braced harder, slid back 1/4 of an inch on the tile, and tried again with the kind of serious, indignant focus that only puppies and very small children at a buffet line can manage. The lobby went quiet. Not the kind of quiet a room goes when something embarrassing happens. The other kind. The kind where 6 adults all stop moving at the same time because they have just understood something at the same time without anybody saying a word. Lily made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. Caleb looked down at the puppy. He did not move for several seconds. When he finally bent to lift Milo gently away from his jeans, the puppy let go of the denim and immediately seized Caleb's left thumb instead, very seriously, with the mild outrage of a creature who has been kept waiting. May let out a breath that she had clearly been holding for 15 years. Brandon took 2 long strides forward and reached for the puppy. He had his fingers closed around Milo's ribs before Caleb had fully straightened. Brandon's voice changed pitch slightly. He said, loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear, that the animal was not authorized to be in the front of the building, that the kennel door had clearly been left open by someone who would be spoken to, and that the gentleman with the hoodie was not, and he wanted this on the record, an approved adopter under any reading of policy. Then Brandon turned, holding the squirming puppy like a sack of vegetables, and walked 4 steps toward the back hallway before he stopped. He stopped because Morgan was now standing. The man in the denim shirt had risen from the bench. He had picked up his Panama hat. He had set it gently on his head. He was not moving toward Brandon. He was simply standing, both hands at his sides, the way a man stands on a porch when he has decided to watch a storm come all the way in before he says anything about it. Brandon looked at him and waited for the man to sit back down. The man did not sit back down. Brandon's smile shifted. It became, for 1/2 second, the smile of a man who is about to fix a problem so that he can get back to his clipboard. He raised his voice slightly and said, "Sir, I am going to need you to this outside. This isn't a free petting zoo, and frankly, we've got 2 situations here that don't concern you." There it was, 2 situations, frankly, sir, strung together in one sentence in the wrong order, with the wrong man in front of the wrong people on the wrong morning of his life. May Whitaker walked out from behind the counter. She did not hurry. She moved the way she had moved at every emergency she had handled in 72 years of life, the way a woman moves who has already buried 2 husbands and 3 siblings and outlived a hurricane that took the roof off her childhood church. She walked past Brandon, past the puppy, past Caleb and Lily, and she stopped 6 feet from the bench. She looked at Morgan and said, soft enough that it carried farther than a shout, "Mr. Freeman, I am so sorry. I should have come up to the front the minute you walked in." The lobby did not move. Brandon's grip on the puppy loosened by a fraction. Caleb, who had been on the verge of just walking out the door, stopped where he was. Clara Hartwell, the senior tech with the folded blanket, brought one hand up to her mouth so slowly, it looked like she was checking whether her face was still there. May kept her eyes on Morgan. "I told the board last quarter," she said, "that something was wrong. I am sorry it had to be this morning." Morgan smiled at her. It was a small, gentle smile, and it changed the temperature of the lobby. He said in that low, unhurried voice that had carried through movie theaters in every state in the Union for half a century, "May, it's all right, you don't owe me a thing." Brandon said, "I'm sorry, what is going on here?" He said it the way men say it when they already know what is going on, and would very much prefer that it not be. May turned to face him for the first time. She did not raise her voice either. She said, "Mr. Hale, the man you just asked to leave this building is the man who paid for this building. I have his letter in the file room. I have had it in the file room for 15 years and 1 month. Would you like me to bring it out here? Or would you prefer to handle this in the office?" Brandon stood very still. The puppy, sensing a change in the wind, stopped squirming. Brandon's clipboard slipped 1/4 of an inch on the counter behind him, and then slowly fell off the edge and clattered to the tile floor. No one picked it up. He said there must be some mistake. May walked, unhurried, to the back office. She came out 46 minutes later, carrying a slim and foam molder, edges soft with age, the tab on top labeled in her own handwriting, "MF, Original, Do Not File." She set it on the counter. She opened it. She took out with 2 careful fingers a photograph and a single sheet of paper. The photograph was taken in February of 2010 on the patch of ground that was now the parking lot of Delta Paws Rescue Center. It showed 7 people standing in front of a wooden sign that read, in raw lumber letters, "Site of Future Shelter, Mississippi Delta." 6 of the people in the photograph were strangers to anyone in the lobby. The 7th, on the far left, in a dark wool coat and a Panama hat, was unmistakably Morgan Freeman, 20 years younger. His hand rested on the shoulder of a woman who was unmistakably a younger May Whitaker. May set the photograph in front of Brandon. He looked at it for what was probably 4 seconds and felt like much longer. She picked up the letter next. It was typed, on letterhead that no longer existed, dated November 14, 2010. She did not read all of it. She read 3 sentences, the same 3 sentences she had read aloud to herself on every November 14th for 15 years. She read, "This shelter is a gift to the Mississippi Delta. It is the only condition of this gift that you never turn an animal away because of how it looks walking in. I would ask you to extend the same courtesy to every person who walks through that door." She set the letter down beside the photograph. She did not touch Brandon. She did not even look at him for a long moment. She turned instead to Morgan and said, "I am sorry, sir. I should have read it to him on the day he was hired. That is on me." Morgan said very quietly, "May, it is not on you." Brandon set the puppy down on the floor. He did it carefully. He set Milo down with both hands, gently, because some animal instinct in him understood that of the many things he was about to be in the next 10 minutes, he could not afford to also be the man who had been rough with a puppy in front of these people. Milo immediately wobbled 3 steps across the tile and reattached himself to Caleb's left boot. Caleb did not look down. He was watching Brandon. Brandon looked at Morgan. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the letter. He looked at May. He looked back at Morgan. His mouth opened and closed twice. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than it had been all morning, but the words were the same words. He said I was following policy. It was the first thing he said, and it was the wrong thing. Everyone in the lobby felt it. He said it again, almost as if he had not heard himself the first time. Mr. Freeman, I was following the adopter quality policy that the board approved in February. With respect, sir, the policy did not include exceptions for visitors who did not identify themselves at intake. Lily, who had been silent for almost 10 minutes, made a small noise that was not a laugh either. It was something tireder than a laugh. Brandon turned to her, which was perhaps the third worst mistake he made that morning. He said, "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. There is a process. There is a reason for the process. The shelter has been losing 18% year over year, and the board specifically directed me to professionalize the intake of adopter applications. With respect, Mr. Freeman has not been in this building in 15 years. He has not seen what running it actually requires." Morgan finally moved. He did not move toward Brandon. He walked slowly with his hat still in his right hand to the counter. He looked at the photograph for a moment. He looked at the letter. He looked at May and he smiled at her again and he said, "May, would you do me a favor and ask Joseph to come out here when he gets in?" May nodded once. She picked up the phone behind the counter and dialed an internal extension. She said, "Mr. Donnelly, could you come out to the lobby when you have a minute?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Freeman is here." "Yes, I understand. Thank you." She set the phone down. She said to Brandon, "Mr. Donnelly is the chairman of our board. He'll be here in about 15 minutes. Brandon's face did not move. Joseph Donnelly was 81 years old. He had been a corporate lawyer in Memphis for 46 years before he retired to a fishing camp on Moon Lake. He had served on the board of Delta Paws since 2011. He was, among other things, the man who had personally drafted the trust documents that funded the shelter, and the only person besides Morgan and May who had ever known where the original $1,247,500 had come from. He had, at the time of May's phone call, just walked into the parking lot, because May had also texted him at 10:42, 3 minutes before Morgan walked into the lobby, and he had been waiting in his truck. In small towns, certain things happen in chains that look like coincidences to people who do not understand small towns. While they waited for Donnelly to come in, 3 things happened in the lobby that none of the people present would forget. The first thing was that Clara Hartwell, the senior tech, set her folded blanket down on the counter and walked over to where Caleb was standing and bent down and picked up Milo from the floor. She held the puppy against her chest. She turned to Brandon and said, in the kind of voice an oncologist uses to deliver bad news, "Brandon, 3 weeks ago you told me to take the photos of the older dogs off the website because they made the homepage feel sad. I want you to know that I did not do that. I want you to know that I lied to you about it. I want everyone here to hear me say it. I lied to my manager, and I am not sorry." Brandon turned slowly to look at her. Clara said, "I have a binder in my desk of every adopter you have turned away in 6 months. 41 names. Most of them were black. Most of them lived in trailers. One of them was a 67-year-old widow whose husband had just died. And you told her we did not adopt to people who lived alone over a certain age. I never told you, but I called her the next day, and I drove the dog to her house myself on my day off." Brandon's mouth opened. Clara was not finished. She said, "The reason I never told you was because I needed this job. My father had just had his second stroke. I want everyone to hear me say that too. I needed this job, so I let you talk to people the way you talk to people, and I am ashamed of myself." May was crying very quietly behind the counter. She made no sound. She just stood there with tears running and her hands flat on the open file folder. The second thing was that Hannah Pruitt, the 19-year-old volunteer, set the water cooler jug down on the carpet so carefully that no water spilled, and she walked across the lobby to where Caleb stood, and she stopped in front of him, and she said, "Sir, I am so sorry for what just happened to you. I want to be a vet. I am going to be a vet, and I want you to know that what just happened in this lobby is not what this shelter is." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. He nodded once. He did not trust his voice. The third thing was that the delivery driver from Greenwood, who had been standing by the door holding a clipboard of his own, said quietly to no one in particular, "I'd like to put my name down on whatever piece of paper makes me a witness to this." Then he walked out to his truck to get a pen. He came back. He wrote his name and number on the back of the bleach receipt and left it on the counter. Joseph Donnelly came through the front door at 11:12 a.m. He was a small man, all shoulders and neck, with white hair clipped close and the kind of pale blue eyes lawyers develop after 46 years of telling people their position is weaker than they think. He looked at Morgan first. He nodded. He looked at the photograph and the letter on the counter. He nodded again. He looked at Brandon for a long moment. He did not nod. He said, "Mr. Hale, my office now." Brandon did not move at first. He looked at Morgan one more time, and the strangest expression moved across his face. The expression of a man who has spent 6 months telling himself a story about himself, and who is now being asked in front of witnesses to tell a different story, and who cannot yet figure out how. He said again the same words he had said 3 times that morning. I was following policy. Donnelly looked at him. He said, "Son, I drafted that policy. You can put it down now." Brandon walked finally toward the back office. He did not look at Caleb. He did not look at Clara. He did not look at the puppy. He looked at the floor, and he kept looking at the floor all the way down the hall. The door closed. In the lobby, no one moved for a long moment. Then, May Whitaker walked around the counter and put both arms around Morgan and held on the way old friends hold on. He patted her shoulder very gently. He said something into her hair that no one else heard. She nodded against his chest. She stepped back. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, the way women wipe their eyes when they do not want to be seen wiping their eyes. Morgan turned finally to Caleb. He walked slowly the 8 or 9 feet across the lobby. He stopped in front of Caleb, and he looked at the puppy in Clara's arms, and he looked back up at Caleb, and he said, "Son, I'm sorry about how you were spoken to this morning. That was not the building I built. I would consider it a kindness if you'd let me help fix it." Caleb said after a moment, "I don't need fixing, sir. I appreciate it." Morgan nodded slowly. He said, "I didn't say you did. I said the building did. Different thing." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the puppy. He looked at Lily. He said finally, "What did you have in mind?" Morgan said, "I'd like to ask Clara, with your permission, to walk you back to the kennel that puppy came out of, and to take whatever paperwork you have on your phone, and to process this adoption the way it was supposed to be processed the moment you walked through that front door. I'd also like to ask you, if you ever find yourself with an hour spare, to come sit on the back porch of this building with me. There's a cup of coffee in it for you and a story I owe my grandmother." Caleb looked at him for another moment. He said quietly, "Yes, sir." Lily behind him made a small sound that was definitely a laugh this time, a wet one. Clara walked Caleb and Lily and the puppy back down the hall. The lobby slowly emptied. May sat down behind the counter and put both hands flat on the file folder, the way a person sits down when they have just put down something they have been carrying for 15 years. Morgan went out to the back porch. The Delta Paw's back porch faced west toward a stand of pin oaks, and beyond that the slow brown push of the Sunflower River. It had been built with money from the original grant. A single wooden bench sat against the railing. Morgan sat down on one end of it and rested his Panama hat beside him and looked out at the trees and waited. Brandon came out 40 minutes later. He had been in Donnelly's office for 37 of those 40 minutes. He had been told, in terms that did not invite reply, that his employment with Delta Paw's Rescue Center was concluded effective immediately, that his severance would be paid through the end of the month, and that any future reference letters would be made available only through legal counsel. He did not look at Morgan when he came out. He almost walked past. He had his hand on the screen door when Morgan said without turning, "Mr. Hale, I'd appreciate a minute of your time if you've got one." Brandon stopped. He stood there for a long moment. He could have kept walking. Anyone watching, including Brandon, would later admit they were not sure why he didn't. He turned slowly and he came back and he stood at the far end of the porch, hands in his pockets, looking at the floorboards. Morgan did not invite him to sit, he just talked. He said, "My grandmother used to keep a mule. Her name was Lottie. The mule—" "Not my grandmother. My grandmother was named Annette. This was outside of Charleston, Mississippi, in a house that's not standing anymore. The mule was old when she got her. She bought her off a man who was running a trader's circuit out of Greenwood, and he had told my grandmother that the mule was barely worth the rope to lead her home. He charged her $4.70 anyway. He told her, and I remember this because I was 8 years old and standing right there, he told her she was wasting good money on a useless animal. My grandmother paid him in dimes. She counted them out into his palm one at a time. Then she walked Lottie home 2 miles down a dirt road and she put her in the back lot and she fed her for the next 9 years. I asked her once why she did that, why she paid $4.70 for a mule that wouldn't pull a plow. She said to me, and I will give you her words exactly because I have not been able to forget them. She said, "Son, the man at the market told me what that mule was worth to him. He didn't tell me what that mule was worth." I have thought about that sentence, Mr. Hale, for almost 80 years. I am not done thinking about it. I believe I will die thinking about it. You came in here 6 months ago and you decided what people were worth to this building. Adopter Quality Index, Unit Economics. I read your memos. I have been on your email list since you were hired. I want you to understand something. I am not angry with you. I am 88 years old. I have been spoken to in more lobbies in this country than you have ever walked into. You were not the first man in a quarter zip to look at me twice. You will not be the last. What I am, Mr. Hale, is disappointed, And I'd like to tell you why. Because I do not believe you will hear this from anyone else on the drive home. I am disappointed because you have a mind. You have a degree. You have, I am told, a real talent for spreadsheets and a real instinct for making a small operation more efficient. Those are not small gifts. Those are the gifts my grandmother would have called good tools. But a man with good tools and no eyes for what a thing is for, son, is a dangerous man in a place like this. This is a shelter. The whole point of a shelter is that the things inside it cannot speak for themselves. The whole point is that the people who come through that door are sometimes the only voice those animals are going to have for the rest of their lives. The whole point, Mr. Hale, is that nobody in here is supposed to be turned away because of how they look walking in. Not the dogs, not the people. I want you to go home and think about that. I want you to take a week. I want you to think about the 41 people Miss Hartwell wrote down in her binder. I want you to look at their names and read them out loud to yourself. And if, at the end of that week, you want to come back here and stand in this same spot and tell me what you've understood, I will sit on this porch and I will listen. I am not going to fire you twice, Mr. Hale. You're already fired. You don't owe me anything. But you owe yourself something, and I think you know what it is. Brandon did not move for almost a minute. He did not cry. He was not the kind of man who cried easily, and he did not become that kind of man on a porch in April. He did not apologize. The words still would not come. But he did at last lift his head and look at Morgan, and he said, his voice flat and slow, "I will think about it, sir." Morgan nodded. He said, "That'll do for today." Brandon walked off the porch. He got in his car. He drove out of the parking lot at exactly 12:07 p.m., and he did not look back, and the people who watched him drive away would not see him again for 2 months and 11 days. When he did come back, he came back alone on a Tuesday morning, and he walked around to the back porch without going through the lobby, and he sat down on the same bench and he waited. Morgan was not there that day, but May was. She brought him a cup of coffee and she sat down beside him and she did not say a word. He stayed for 90 minutes. Then he stood up and he said, "Miss Whitaker, I would like, when you have time, to read that binder." She said, "Take it home, son. Bring it back when you're ready." That part of the story is not finished yet. Some stories are not supposed to be. Back inside the building, on the morning everything happened, Caleb Rohr signed his name on an adoption form at 12:15 p.m. The fee was $65. He paid in cash. Clara handed him a soft canvas carrier, a starter bag of puppy food, a stapled packet on 5-week-old shepherd care, and a handwritten note from May that read, in pencil, "His name is Milo. He has been waiting." Caleb walked out the front door at 12:23. Morgan was waiting for him on the porch. He stood up when Caleb came out. He shook Caleb's hand. He said, "Son, I won't keep you. I just wanted to give you this." He handed Caleb a small card. It was a business card, but not the kind men hand each other in lobbies. It was printed on heavy cream paper. The front read, in plain black type, simply, "Tallahatchie River Foundation, Veterans Program, Jackson, Mississippi." On the back, in handwriting Caleb did not recognize, was a name and a phone number and one short line, "Tell him Morgan sent you. He'll know what to do." Caleb looked at the card for a long time. He said, "I haven't talked to anyone in a long time, sir." Morgan said, "I know." Caleb said, "How do you know?" Morgan looked at him. He smiled, that same small smile from the bench in the lobby. He said, "Son, I'm 88 years old. I have learned to read certain things in certain faces. You don't need to tell me anything. I'd just like you to make the call. Whenever you're ready. Next week. 6 months. Doesn't matter to me. Matters to him." Caleb put the card in the chest pocket of his hoodie, the one over his heart. He nodded once. Morgan looked at Milo, who had fallen asleep already in the canvas carrier with one ear folded under his chin. He said, "That puppy picked you." Caleb said, "I don't know why." Morgan said, "I do. Maybe you were the one needed finding." He patted Caleb's shoulder once, very gently. He picked up his Panama hat from the porch railing. He set it on his head. He walked, unhurried, down the porch steps and around the side of the building to the parking lot, where a dark green pickup truck was waiting with the driver's side window rolled down and Joseph Donnelly sitting behind the wheel. Morgan got in. They drove out of the parking lot at 12:31 p.m. north, in the direction of Memphis, where Morgan had a small private airfield and a twin-engine Cessna and a clear sky. Inside the shelter, Clara Hartwell was promoted to interim director at 1 p.m. that same day by phone. May Whitaker continued to staple intake forms behind the counter, 2 soft taps for the things that mattered. Hannah Pruitt was offered a paid position the following Monday, and she accepted, and she went on to vet school 3 years later on a scholarship she did not know was funded by the Tallahatchie River Foundation until the day she graduated. 41 people were called, over the next 6 weeks, by Clara Hartwell, working from a binder she had kept in her desk for 6 months. 39 of them came back to the shelter, 26 of them adopted, 11 of them simply came to say thank you. The widow whose husband had died was the first one called. She came back on a Wednesday afternoon and adopted a beagle named Pete, who had been at the shelter for 2 years and 3 months. She named him after her husband. Nobody at the shelter ever told her she shouldn't. Caleb Rohr made the phone call on the back of the card 7 days later. The man on the other end did not act surprised. He asked Caleb what time he could be in Jackson. Caleb drove down the following Tuesday. He kept driving down every Tuesday after that for the next 14 months. Milo grew, so did Caleb. Not all at the same pace, but both of them did, and Lily noticed, and so did Clara, who started leaving folded blankets on Caleb's porch every other Sunday, until one day she stopped leaving them and just brought them inside herself when he opened the door. That happened 8 months in. She was not a love story. She was a friend. Sometimes those are bigger than the other kind. Morgan came back to the shelter 4 months after that April morning. He did not come for an event. He came on a Tuesday at 10:47 in the morning, the same time he had come the first day, and he sat on the same bench against the back wall of the lobby. He did not announce himself. May stapled 2 intake forms softly. Clara came out of the back, and she smiled, and she did not say anything, and she brought him a glass of sweet tea. He sat there for a little over an hour. Several people came in and out. One of them was a young mother with 2 small children and a leash and no dog at the end of it. She had come, she said, to ask whether the shelter had any small dogs that were good with kids. Clara walked her back. Morgan watched her go. The youngest child, a boy of about 4, paused on his way down the hall and stared at the man on the bench with the white beard and the Panama hat, and the man on the bench smiled at the boy, and the boy smiled back, and then the boy ran after his mother. That is, when you take all of it together, the morning the Delta Paws Rescue Center remembered what it had been built for. Some changes do not announce themselves. Some of them walk in wearing a denim shirt and a Panama hat at 10:47 on a Tuesday in April. Some of them are 5 weeks old and have paws too big for the rest of them. Some of them are a sister who refused to let her brother stay in a trailer one more weekend. Some of them are a woman behind a counter with a stapler and a 15-year-old letter, waiting for the right reason to use them both. Some of them are simply a man on a porch saying to another man, "You owe yourself something, and I think you know what it is." The Mississippi Delta is full of small buildings on small roads. Some of them are shelters, some of them are churches, some of them are diners. All of them, if you walk in slow enough and listen long enough, will tell you the same thing in the end. Nobody in here is supposed to be turned away because of how they look walking in. That is perhaps the only thing worth remembering from this story. The rest is just the long way of saying it. If this story brought someone to mind today, consider reaching out. A phone call, a short message, a name written down. The world has a way of getting larger when we remember the people in it. If stories like this one mean something to you, you are welcome to share it with someone who could use it. And you are welcome to stay for more. There is room on the bench. May you be the one who walks slowly into the room. May you be the one who waits. May you be the one who says when it matters, the only sentence that matters. Nobody here is to be turned away because of how they look walking in. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created with the assistance of AI for the purpose of sharing positive messages and life lessons. It is inspired by Morgan Freeman's well-known reputation for wisdom, his real love of the Mississippi Delta, his beekeeping passion, his pilot's license, and his commitment to his southern community. The events, characters, other than Morgan Freeman himself, locations and dialogue depicted are entirely fictional and not intended to represent or target any real individual, business, or organization. Any resemblance to actual events or persons other than Morgan Freeman is purely coincidental. No AI voice cloning or deepfake technology has been used to impersonate Morgan Freeman.